I wanted to be a cheerleader, a sorority sister, a good student, but my life was changing. So many young kids were coming home in body bags. Ending the war became more important to me than anything. On April 30th, 1970, President Richard Nixon ordered troops to invade Cambodia because of suspicion that the Viet Cong were using the area as a safe space in the war against South Vietnam. At this point in time, American troops had been aiding South Vietnam for more than 10 years, and as a result were growing weary. Nixon failed to inform the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State of this invasion. The news of the Cambodian invasion was announced hours after the invasion began. Many Americans were shocked and outraged, since Nixon's presidential campaign was based on the very opposite, removing American soldiers from the Vietnam War. Americans' disapproval translated into rallies and demonstrations around the country. In Kent, Ohio, students of Kent State University began publicizing their disapproval by organizing anti-war rallies. The rallies lasted the entire weekend following the public announcement of the invasion of Cambodia. On May 1st at noon, students held a burial ceremony of the U.S. Constitution in the university's commons. This demonstration was symbolic of how students perceived Nixon's actions of ordering the Cambodian invasions. In a press conference that same day, President Richard Nixon described anti-war activists as bums blowing up campuses. Later that night, students along with other activists met at a bar in downtown Kent to discuss ways they should respond to the invasion. After this meeting, the students flooded the streets, fueled by rage from the announcement and assumably inhibited by the consumption of alcohol. They set fire to garbage cans and broke store windows while chanting vulgar statements. Police arrived at the scene and arrested 60 protesters. The next morning, James Rhodes, governor of Ohio, was informed of the previous night's situation. Governor Rhodes called in the Ohio National Guard to maintain peace in the city, Kent, Ohio. Around 8 p.m. that night, students at Kent State set fire to an old rickety ROTC building on campus. While firefighters attempted to stabilize the blaze, protesters cut the fire hoses being used. 1,200 National Guardsmen reported that night and remained stationed on campus through the weekend. The Guardsmen were encouraged to befriend students in order to create a civil environment. Allison Krause, who was shot and killed just days later, was seen giving a guardsman a yellow daisy that was placed in the barrel of his gun. Krause was quoted, "Flowers are better than bullets." In response to the protests, Governor Rhodes assessed the scene, saying they're worse than the brown shirts and the communist element, and also the night riders and the vigilantes. Student activists hung flyers around the campus to rally another protest at noon, Monday, May 4th, on Central Campus. On the morning of May 4th, a bomb threat caused the education building to close and some classes to be canceled. Other students informed their professors of their planned absence to attend the rally. Students at this protest ranged from those passionately involved, some partially participating, and others just sitting and watching out of curiosity. The Ohio National Guard was on scene when the rally began. The guard was greeted by screams and rocks hurled at them. The guard ordered the thousands of college students to leave. Instead, the students refused and got louder. The guardsmen then tried to disband the crowd through the use of bullhorns. Once they realized the students were not going to leave, they suited up with tear gas masks, bayonets on the end of their rifles, and launched tear gas into the crowd. Members of the crowd picked up the tear gas canisters and threw them back at the guardsmen in retaliation. The guardsmen forced the students down the hill and onto the football practice field. Eventually, guardsmen were blocked by fences on 3 sides with protesters on the other. They had no choice other than to retreat back up the hill. 20 minutes passed from the time the rally in the Commons was dispersed. Once the guards reached the top, approximately 28 guards opened fire on the unarmed college students. Victim Dean Collar recalled, "When the shooting stopped, it was very eerie and quiet for a moment. Then, the wailing and the screaming resurfaced. But this time, it was a much higher pitch. People were getting up and seeing the damage that had been done. 13 students were now lying on the ground." 20-year-old student activist Jeffrey Miller was dead instantly due to a gunshot wound to the head. Within minutes, Sandra Schuer died after bleeding out from the neck. Sandra was not participating in the rally, but was headed to a speech pathology class when the chaos broke loose. Students were injured from shots that were as far as 750 feet away. Others were as close as 71 feet from the shots fired. Uninjured students rushed to aid those who were wounded. While students and protesters attempted to help over the next couple of hours, 2 more students died from severe wounds. Allison Krause died in an ambulance after being shot in the chest. Curiosity brought her to the rally that day. The second student to die within those 2 hours was bystander William Schroeder, who was also shot in the chest. May 4th, 1970, 4 students died and 9 were injured. Injured student Dean Collar was at the rally with plans to make it to his 1:10 p.m. class. Instead, he was paralyzed and wheelchair confined for the remainder of his life. The incident became known as the Kent State Massacre. Kent State University was closed immediately and stayed closed for the following 6 weeks. As the public became aware of the event, both hate and hope arose. In the following 3 days, more than 100 major student demonstrations occurred each day. The following day, President Richard Nixon called for hope to arise from darkness. This should remind us all once again that when dissent turns to violence, it invites tragedy. It is my hope that this tragic and unfortunate incident will strengthen the determination of all the nation's campuses, administrators, faculty, and students alike to stand firmly for the right which exists in this country of peaceful dissent and just as strong against the resort to violence as a means of such expression. The family of the deceased began receiving hate mail for their children's involvement in protests. One letter William Schroeder's parents received read, "There's nothing better than a dead, destructive, riot-making communist, and that's what your son was. Be thankful he's gone." But at the same time, many people reached out to his family thanking them for his persistence to make a change. Dr. Benjamin Spock spoke at Jeffrey Miller's funeral service and said that the victims of the Kent State shootings may do more to end the Vietnam War than all the rest of us have been able to do. Anti-war activism began to arise around the country. In the 1969 to 1970 school year, more than 2.5 million students went on strike. 700 campuses shut down following the Kent State shootings as a result of 9,000 protests and 84 acts of arson that took place on campuses throughout the nation. Outraged students began protesting at their universities, and protests took place at the Capitol as well. On May 14th, just 10 days after the shootings at Kent State, 14 students at Jackson State University were shot and injured by local police during the anti-war protest. Kent State was more prominent at the time because Jackson State was an all-black school, and racism was still playing a role in the 1970 American society. President Nixon issued the Scranton Commission in June of 1970 to investigate the Kent State shootings and campus violence around the country. The commission was published in September and stated that although the violent actions of the students may have contributed to the events that took place, the shootings on May 4th at Kent State were unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable. Legal issues arose from the massacre as well. Over the span of the next 10 years, 12 lawsuits were filed in Ohio state and federal courts. Guardsmen were sued on the terms of depriving students from their constitutional rights. The American Civil Liberties Union represented students in 8 cases. Throughout all the legal battles, extensive research was conducted. Jury members were taken to the site of the shootings where simulation of the events were carried out. However, the trials resulted in little to no consequences for the guards' actions. Settlements reached over $675,000, but the families of the deceased wanted answers rather than money. Laurel Krause, sister of Allison Krause, who was killed during the Kent State Massacre, founded the Kent State Truth Tribunal, an organization intended to discover the truth of the events of May 4th. Krause hoped to receive a full account of the tragic events. The students that lost their lives at Kent State have become a symbol of respect for dissent. Kent State has made efforts to educate citizens of the mistakes made in the tragic massacre and hopes to avoid repetition. Kent State University is home to a national landmark marking the location in which students died standing up for the right to protest. Kent State also offers a Kent State Massacre class, and there is a May 4th Visitor Center which houses information about the lives of students who died and the events of that day. Many Americans view the Kent State Massacre as a day the United States lost their innocence. On the other hand, the massacre helped America come together in unity. May 4th, 1970 led to young students immersing themselves into American politics as well as the recognition of their own and others' First Amendment rights. The 67 bullets wounding the nation led to great change in American politics. Dan Rather, an American political journalist, said, "Dissent has made us better in a pursuit to be a more perfect union. With that, Americans should respect dissent, for on this our country was founded." Although the Kent State Massacre led to the tragic deaths of 4 students, it shed light on political issues in America that needed to be addressed and helped expedite the process of pulling American soldiers out of the Vietnam War.